The Tree of Forgotten Dreams. Elian stood at the edge of the village where cobblestone paths gave way to the dense embrace of the ancient forest. The world beyond the boundary felt like a whisper in his ear, an unspoken invitation he could no longer resist. In his dreams, the Tree of Forgotten Dreams had called to him, a sentinel of silver light, its roots entwined with the very fabric of lost aspirations. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, their tales tangled with reverence and fear. To Elian, the tree was more than a myth. It was a beacon in the fog of his restless heart. The village had grown suffocating in its familiarity. Days bled into one another, marked only by the hum of mundane tasks and the faint ache of something unspoken. Elian, once a blacksmith whose hands crafted wonders from iron, had abandoned his forge. His tools lay rusting beneath layers of dust, and his fire, both literal and figurative, had long since cooled. A man without purpose, he often found himself staring at the horizon, longing for something he couldn't name. The dreams began one winter night when the wind howled like a grieving spirit. Elian saw the tree for the first time, its trunk shimmering like moonlight on water, its branches reaching out to the heavens, cradling orbs of light that pulsed like beating hearts. A voice, neither man nor woman, had whispered, "Come find what you've lost." He had awakened with a jolt, the dream's images etched into his mind like molten metal hardening into form. Each night thereafter, the dreams grew more vivid, more insistent. The tree stood at the center of a forest shrouded in mist, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen flowers. Whispers filled the space, voices both familiar and strange. The whispers lingered even after he woke, haunting him as he moved through his hollow days. The villagers noticed the change in him. "Elian," they said, "you look as though you've seen a ghost." In truth, he felt as though he were becoming one. The forge, once his sanctuary, now seemed to mock him with its silence. His hands, which had once shaped beauty from raw metal, now trembled with uncertainty. The tree was his only solace, its image a reminder that perhaps his life had not yet reached its end. On the morning he decided to leave, the village was cloaked in mist. He packed lightly, a flask of water, a satchel of bread, and the small hammer he had used to craft his first blade. As he stepped onto the forest path, he felt a tremor beneath his feet, as if the earth itself recognized his journey. The forest greeted him with an uncanny stillness. The towering trees seemed to lean closer, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blotted out the sun. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying the faintest trace of something sweet and ancient. Elian paused, listening. A faint hum, like the plucking of a single harp string, resonated through the woods. It was the same sound he had heard in his dreams. He moved deeper into the forest, each step a step away from the life he had known and the man he had become. The path was not marked, yet his feet seemed to find their way, as though drawn by an invisible thread. The deeper he went, the more the world around him changed. The trees took on an otherworldly glow, their bark glistening like polished stone. Strange flowers with petals of silver and violet bloomed in the shadows, their fragrance heady and intoxicating. Elian's heart quickened. The hum grew louder, weaving itself into whispers that seemed to rise from the forest floor. He could not make out the words, but their tone was unmistakable, a mixture of sorrow and hope. He paused to catch his breath, leaning against a tree whose surface was unnaturally smooth. As his hand brushed the bark, a chill ran through him, and a single word rang clear in his mind. Remember. The whispers swelled, carrying him forward like a river's current. He did not question where they led, for in their enigmatic call he found something he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose. The tree of forgotten dreams awaited, and with it the answers to the questions he had long been too afraid to ask. The forest thickened as Elian pressed forward, the path beneath his feet fading into an endless expanse of silver mist. Here, the air seemed alive, heavy with whispers that curled around him like smoke, fleeting and intangible. Each murmur brushed against his consciousness, stirring fragments of memories he couldn't quite place. At times, the voices felt achingly familiar, as though they belonged to people he had once known, or dreams he had long abandoned. Yet, when he tried to focus on the words, they dissolved into the soft rustling of unseen leaves. The deeper he ventured, the more the forest seemed to shift. What had started as a natural woodland now bore traces of the uncanny. Trees arched unnaturally high, their branches spiraling like twisted staircases toward a sky obscured by mist. Pale, blue fungi clung to the roots, glowing faintly as though imbued with starlight. Pools of water, still as glass, dotted the ground, reflecting not the forest around them, but images of far-off places, golden fields, bustling marketplaces, and endless seas. Elian avoided these pools, wary of what they might reveal. The hum he had first heard at the forest's edge grew louder, no longer a single note, but a melody woven with complexity. It seemed to call his name, not with words, but with a feeling, a pull deep in his chest that urged him forward. Yet, with each step, the forest tested his resolve. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, too quick to catch but lingering long enough to unsettle him. He glanced over his shoulder more than once, half expecting to find someone or something following him. The whispers grew sharper then, almost urgent, as if to reassure him that he was not alone in his solitude. It was during one such moment of unease that he first saw the figure. At the edge of the path, shrouded in the mist, stood a being neither fully human nor entirely spirit. Its form was cloaked in twilight, shifting as though it were made of shadow and fading light. Elian froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure tilted its head, and though it had no discernible face, he felt its gaze pierce through him. "You seek the tree of forgotten dreams," it said, his voice neither male nor female, but something ancient and resonant. "Do you know why?" Elian hesitated. The question seemed simple, yet the answer eluded him. Why had he left the safety of the village? Why had he abandoned the life he had built, hollow as it was, for the uncertainty of this journey? I've forgotten," he admitted, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. The figure inclined its head, a gesture that might have been pity or understanding. To find what you have lost, you must face what you fear, it said, its form rippling as though caught in an unseen wind. The path ahead is not marked by steps but by choices. Be wary, Elian. Not all who seek the tree are prepared to see what it reveals. Before Elian could respond, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving behind only the echo of its warning. The forest fell silent, the whispers momentarily stilled. Elian stood motionless, grappling with the figure's cryptic words. His fears? He thought he had left them behind, buried beneath years of denial. Yet, the forest seemed to sense otherwise, its stillness growing oppressive, as if it were waiting for him to move. Gathering his courage, he stepped forward, the hum rising again to guide him. The path grew narrower, twisting like the spirals of a labyrinth. The mist thickened, obscuring everything but the faint glow of bioluminescent moss clinging to the trees. Elian felt the forest closing in around him, each step heavier than the last. He stopped abruptly as the path ended at a wide clearing, bathed in faint, otherworldly light. In the center stood a gnarled tree, its bark black as obsidian, and its branches bare. Beneath it, the ground churned as shadowy figures began to rise, their forms shifting and indistinct. They had no faces, yet Elian felt their presence like a cold hand on his shoulder. The whispers returned, louder now, their words sharp and biting. Coward, failure, unworthy. Elian clenched his fists, his breath quickening. These were his own thoughts, his own doubts, given form. The figures stepped closer, surrounding him, their shapes darkening as they fed on his fear. He wanted to run, to turn back to the safety of the village, but the hum, the melody, resounded in his chest, steady and unwavering. It reminded him of the tree he sought, the answers that awaited him. Face what you fear, he murmured to himself, the figure's warning echoing in his mind. Summoning what courage he had left, Elian stepped toward the shadows, prepared to confront whatever truths they held. The clearing pulsed with an eerie energy as Elian stepped closer to the figures rising from the ground. Their forms solidified into shapes that wavered between human and something less tangible, as if sculpted from the very fabric of his own fears. They towered over him, yet their movements were strangely fluid, their edges trailing into the mist like dissipating smoke. Each figure bore no face, yet Elian felt their presence pierce his soul. They began to whisper, their voices sharp and cutting, the words echoing the doubts he had buried deep within himself. "You abandoned the forge," one hissed, its shadowy limbs gesturing as if hammering an invisible blade. "You feared failure more than you loved your craft." Another figure, darker and more amorphous, drifted closer. "You let your dreams wither because you lacked the courage to nurture them," it said, its voice low and venomous. "The fire in you was never strong enough to last." Elian staggered back, the weight of their words pressing down on him like a physical force. His chest tightened, his breaths shallow. These weren't accusations from some external foe. They were truths he had fought to ignore, now dredged up and made manifest by the forest's uncanny power. The shadows grew bolder, circling him like predators, their whispers intensifying into a cacophony of self-loathing and regret. "You could have been great," another figure spat, "but you chose the safe path, and now you are nothing." Elian fell to his knees, his hands gripping the damp earth. He wanted to scream, to silence the voices that felt as though they were clawing at his very soul. His mind flashed with memories he had tried to forget. The forge where he had spent hours, shaping metal into intricate works of art. The joy of seeing his creations admired by others. And the day he had walked away from it all, consumed by the fear that he would never truly be good enough. The shadows loomed closer, their forms merging into a swirling mass of darkness. They pressed against him, their weight suffocating, their whispers now a single, unified chant. Unworthy, unworthy. "No," Elian whispered, his voice trembling. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to look up. "I am not unworthy." The chant faltered, the shadows rippling as if struck by an unseen wind. "I may have abandoned my craft," Elian continued, his voice growing steadier. "But it was fear that held me back, not my lack of passion. Fear of failure, fear of judgment. But I am tired of running. I will not let fear define me any longer." The shadows recoiled, their edges fraying like smoke caught in a breeze. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy silence that hung in the air like a held breath. Elian rose to his feet, his legs unsteady, but his resolve firm. The clearing seemed to brighten slightly, the oppressive energy lifting, as if the forest itself acknowledged his defiance. One shadow remained, smaller and less imposing than the others. It hovered before Elian, its form flickering uncertainly. Unlike the others, it did not speak, but Elian felt its presence as a faint ache in his chest. He reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against its surface. The shadow dissolved at his touch, and a memory flooded his mind. He was a boy again, sitting beside his father at the forge. His father's hands, strong and steady, guided his own as they shaped a glowing piece of iron. "It's not about perfection," his father had said. "It's about the fire in your heart. As long as that burns, you can create something beautiful." Tears filled Elian's eyes as the memory faded. The shadows were gone now, the clearing silence save for the faint hum that had guided him this far. He felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The doubts that had haunted him for years were still there, but they no longer controlled him. He had faced them, and in doing so, he had reclaimed a part of himself. The path ahead became clear, a faint glow leading deeper into the forest. Elian knew the tree of forgotten dreams awaited him. He had passed the first test, but he also knew the journey was far from over. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, the whispers now a distant echo, guiding him towards what lay ahead. The path grew narrower as Elian ventured deeper into the forest. The air, thick with the scent of damp moss and ancient wood, seemed to hum with anticipation. The faint glow that guided him brightened with each step, casting elongated shadows that danced in the corners of his vision. Yet, the forest felt less oppressive now, the whispers no longer taunting, but instead carrying a faint, melodic rhythm, as though the trees themselves were singing a forgotten tune. Then he saw it. The tree of forgotten dreams stood in the center of a vast clearing, its silver bark shimmering like moonlight on still water. Its roots sprawled outward, thick and gnarled, weaving into the ground as if anchoring the earth itself. The branches reached high into the misty sky, cradling countless orbs of light. Each orb pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, illuminating the tree with an otherworldly radiance. Elian stepped closer, his breath caught in his chest. The orbs seemed alive, their light shifting and swirling, forming fleeting images that vanished before he could fully grasp them. He felt an inexplicable pull toward the tree, as though it recognized him and had been waiting for his arrival. A voice, soft and resonant, filled the clearing. It was not a voice of words, but one of emotion, achingly familiar, yet distant, like the echo of a song heard in childhood. Elian could not understand its meaning, but he felt its essence, a mixture of sorrow, hope, and something he could only describe as forgiveness. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing the smooth bark. The tree felt warm, pulsing faintly beneath his touch. The orbs above flared brighter, and one began to descend, floating toward him with an almost sentient grace. Elian's heart pounded as the orb hovered before him, its glow illuminating his face. Within its light, an image formed, a forge ablaze, sparks flying as a younger version of himself hammered a blade with a fire in his eyes that he had long forgotten. The orb spoke without words, the memories flooding his mind in vivid detail. He saw the days when he had poured his soul into his craft, the joy of creation that had once defined him. He remembered the pride he had felt in shaping raw metal into something beautiful, something alive. But he also relived the moments of doubt, the critical whispers of others, the harsh judgments that had chipped away at his confidence. He saw himself walking away from the forge, his tools left behind to rust, his dreams abandoned out of fear. Elian fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The orb hovered closer, bathing him in its light, its warmth a balm to the wounds he had carried for so long. The tree's voice resonated again, a question forming in his mind. What do you see? I see myself, Elian whispered, his voice trembling. The man I was, the man I could have been, and the man I still can be. The orb pulsed once, as if in affirmation, before dissolving into his chest. A warmth spread through him, filling the hollow spaces he hadn't realized were there. He felt lighter, as though the burdens he had carried for years were finally lifting. The tree's branches swayed gently, as if in approval, the orbs above glowing brighter in response. Elian stood, his gaze fixed on the tree. He felt an unspoken bond with it now, as though it had shown him not only what he had lost, but also what he could reclaim. The whispers in the clearing softened into a gentle hum, the melody soothing and hopeful. As he turned to leave, the tree's voice echoed one final time, clear and resonant. Dreams are never truly lost. They wait for us, patiently, until we are ready to claim them again. Elian looked back at the tree, its silver light fading into the mist. He felt a profound sense of peace, as though he had been given a second chance to embrace the fire within him. The path leading out of the clearing was illuminated now, beckoning him toward a future he had yet to shape. With renewed purpose, Elian stepped forward, the melody of the forest guiding him home. Elian emerged from the forest as dawn broke over the horizon, the light spilling across the landscape like liquid gold. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, untainted by the shadows of the past. Behind him, the forest stood silent, its mysteries veiled once more in mist. Yet he felt its presence lingering, like a watchful guardian, its hum now a distant echo in his chest. In his hands he carried the small hammer he had brought with him, a tool that had once seemed ordinary but now felt heavy with meaning. It was a reminder of where he had begun, a symbol of the fire he had reclaimed. As Elian walked back toward the village, his mind swirled with possibilities. The images shown to him by the tree of forgotten dreams were etched into his soul, not as wounds, but as lessons. He no longer feared his failures. They were as much a part of him as his successes. When he reached the edge of the village, the cobblestones felt unfamiliar under his boots, as though he had stepped into another world. People paused in their morning routines, their faces reflecting a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Elian had left the village as a shadow of himself, but he returned as someone changed, someone who carried the quiet strength of the forest within him. The forge stood exactly as he had left it, the building weathered but sturdy, the doors closed tightly as if holding its breath. Elian hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the wooden handle. The memories of the forge returned to him, the crackling fire, the rhythmic clang of metal, the sweat and satisfaction of creation. He could almost hear his father's voice again, urging him to trust in the fire of his heart. With a deep breath, he pushed the doors open. The interior was cold and dark, the hearth long extinguished. Tools lay scattered on the workbench, their edges dulled by disuse, while a fine layer of dust covered every surface. Yet, beneath the stillness, Elian felt the forge's potential, like embers waiting to be rekindled. He set the hammer down with deliberate care, its metallic clang echoing through the space like the first note of a forgotten melody. Elian began to clean. He swept the floors, polished the tools, and cleared the workbench, his movements purposeful and unhurried. As the hours passed, the forge came alive again, its corners brightened by sunlight streaming through the windows. Finally, he approached the hearth. With steady hands, he built a fire, feeding it kindling and watching as the flames flickered to life. The warmth spread through the forge, dispelling the chill that had settled there. Elian smiled, a small, genuine smile that felt foreign but welcome. He placed a raw piece of iron on the anvil, its rough edges glinting in the firelight. Gripping the hammer, he raised it high, letting its weight settle in his hand before bringing it down with a resounding strike. The sound reverberated through the forge, filling it with a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Elian worked tirelessly, his focus unwavering, his hands moving with the precision of someone rediscovering a long-lost part of themselves. The iron took shape under his guidance, transforming into something new. A blade, sharp and elegant, its edges gleaming with promise. As the day faded into twilight, Elian stepped outside, holding the finished blade in his hands. The villagers gathered around him, drawn by the sound of the forge's rebirth. They marveled at the craftsmanship, their whispers filled with awe. But Elian paid them little mind. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the first stars began to appear. The tree of forgotten dreams was a memory now, but its light remained within him. He had faced his fears, embraced his failures, and rediscovered the fire that made him whole. Elian knew his journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new doubts to confront, but he no longer feared them. He was not the man he had been when he left the village. He was something more. With the blade in his hand and the forge at his back, Elian took his first step onto a path of his own making. The whispers of the forest faded, replaced by the steady beat of his own heart, carrying him forward into a future as bright and limitless as the fire he had reclaimed.